Sieg. Ah, fucking halt. Oh, no, niggas. Corona. So. Oh, Junge, wenn die ganze Scheiße inzwischen, Alter. Junge, extra so schwer gemacht, damit man sich findet, Alter. Hideo Kojima for Smash. Alter, die ganze Scheiße, die ja schon wieder steht. Let's go! PlayStation 5, Leute. Metal, Leute, willkommen zu diesem Stream-Video, was auch immer dann vorhanden bleiben wird. In 10 Minuten wird die PS5 vorgestellt, beziehungsweise der Architektenspaß Mark Carney wird uns einen Einblick in die Architektur von der PS5 werfen. Also ob die PS5 gezeigt wird, weiß immer noch niemand. Die haben gestern angekündigt, dass heute was gezeigt wird. Das ist wahrscheinlich dieser Stream. Wie viel gezeigt wird, weiß niemand. Sony üblich wird es wahrscheinlich auf fast nichts hinauslaufen. Vielleicht haben wir aber Glück. Ich bin sehr gespannt. Wir haben ja eigentlich nichts von der PS5 bis jetzt mitbekommen, außer am Anfang. Schon ein bisschen länger auf dieser Messe da halt das PS5-Logo halt, was wir hier sehen. Und halt, dass es eine SSD haben wird. 3D-Sound, 8K, 120 FPS, ja, ja. Destiny 3 hoffentlich auch. Shrek 5, Alter. Ja, also keine Ahnung, was da auf uns zukommt. Ich hoffe aber, dass wir sehen, wie die PS5 aussieht. Ob sie abwärtskompatibel ist und hoffentlich mit PS3 auch. PS2 und 1 kann mir eigentlich am Arsch vorbeigehen, da ich keine PS1 oder 2 Spiele habe mehr. Doch ein PS1-Spiel habe ich, aber ist egal. Hauptsache PS3 abwärtskompatibel, der Rest ist mir eigentlich scheißegal. Ich bin gespannt, ich bin sehr gespannt. Als Hardcore-PS PlayStation-Fan. Auch mit Video übertragen, Digga, willst du mir sagen, geht schon wieder nix. Das heißt Maul halt, ne? Lul weh. Ausgangsstärke. Halt ein Maul, Mann. PlayStation ist wichtiger. Ja, 8 Minuten. Dauert's noch. Minecraft 2 wird angekündigt, ja. Uncharted 5 auch. GTA 6 auch. Plants vs. Zombies 3. Junge, diese Chats immer, da steht nur Bullshit drin, ne? Da steht PUBG 2. PUBG 2. Nice, Lul W. Ja, 160.000 Zuschauer will ich auch mal gern haben. Junge, wenn die jetzt echt PS5 auf nächstes Jahr verschieben, hole ich mal. Also, kann ja eh sein, wird auch wahrscheinlich sein, dass die neuen Konsolen verschoben werden. Ist mir nur recht, habe ich mehr Zeit zum Geld sparen. Finde ich trotzdem hart. Trotzdem, dass Corona so hart PlayStation in den Arsch fickt, dass es ja wahrscheinlich verschoben wird. Schon hart, aber ja, kommt vor. Bäh. Ja. Pac-Man, let's go. Bananavirus. Coronavirus. PlayStation 5 as a Smash Bros. Charakter. Junge, hoffentlich zeigen die scheiß Playsee, Alter. Fände ich so geil. No joke. 6 Minuten geht's los. Spam F. Eine Oso-Map geht währenddessen noch. Damit ich mich jetzt hier nicht komplett langweile. Welcome to Sauce. Was kommt, wenn ich eigentlich PlayStation eingebe? Okay, warum auch immer. Hä? Sortieren müssen wir erstmal lernen, oder was? Nee, das will ich alles nicht. Was will ich denn? Schwer zu sagen. Ich habe keine Ahnung, was ich will. Jimmy Fick lässt das Spiel das Game mit einer Gitarre. Schön wär's. Ein anderer Moderator ist gerade mal. What the fuck? Markus im Stream busted. Ja. Obwohl es wieder heißt The Road to PS5, also. Naja, mal gucken, ne, was da jetzt kommt. Mal sehen. Mal sehen. 2 Minuten, Digga, es geht gleich los. Es ist einfach geil, so ein Moment. Es bleibt halt dann in Erinnerung so. Dann, wenn du ein paar Jahre an der PS5 spielst, denkst du dir so, Digga, ich war damals dabei, du kleiner Nazi. Ich war dabei, als die sich gedacht haben, ja, jetzt können wir mal endlich mal was zeigen nach über einem halben Jahr. Nach fast einem Jahr Ankündigung. Ja, und gleich geht's los und das finde ich sehr geil. Ja, und auch scheißegal, auch wenn die PS5 weniger Teraflops als die Xbox hat, ist mir egal, die Konsole wird eh besser. Solange es nicht aussieht wie ein scheiß Aschenbecher, ist mir alles gut recht. No front gegen Xbox, no front. Aber Xbox sieht aus wie ein scheiß Aschenbecher, so ein öffentlicher. So bei den Krankenhäusern stehen immer solche Teile, genauso sieht es aus. Genauso sieht es aus. 60 Sekunden. Erstmal Pringles-Packung öffnen. Schön meine Fressgeräusche. ASMR, Jimmy ist jetzt zurück. Oh, Junge. Oh, ihr müsst immer, wenn ihr eine Pringles-Packung und eine Chips-Packung öffnet, erstmal fett inhalieren, den Geruch. Vor allem ist nicht mal ein Stream. Ist ja nur ein Video, lol. Ehre genommen, Alter. Ha, let's go, Alter. Jetzt start doch mal die Kacke hier. Here we go, go. Alle holen sich runter im Chat. Warum, wie viele Syrer, Alter? Was ist denn los auf einmal schon wieder? Als ob es nur syrische Gamer gibt. Startet die Scheiße auch mal? Das Stream läuft auf YouNow, Alter. Und auf Pornhub. Und bei mir. Weil da läuft ja nicht. Kannst du knicken. Läuft nur bei mir oder auf Pornhub. Stell dir mal vor, man könnte auf Pornhub streamen, Alter, wie krank das wäre. Oh, das Video geht los, let's go. Wir gehen rein. Natürlich 1080p. Das alles da wird nicht akzeptiert. Ein bisschen laut was. Obwohl, darf so laut sein. 1,5 Minuten noch. So richtig ranzig noch mit diesem Countdown davor, Alter. Ja. Nicht mal ein eigenes Sony-Intro. Nein, original YouTube. Fail wäre jetzt, wenn der Countdown kommt, dann noch ein Countdown. Weil Sony dachte, es kommt nur ihr Countdown dann, aber dann kommt noch ein Countdown, dann gibt's 2 Countdowns. Inception. Oh ja, Junge, ich hab so Bock. Ich würd so heulen, wenn nichts wieder gezeigt wird fast, Digga. Ich möchte die Konsole heute sehen und den Controller am besten auch noch, wenigstens. Was drin ist, ist mir scheißegal, ich werde es sowieso kaufen. Und das Abwärtskompatibilität. Oder meinetwegen nur eins der 3 Sachen, wenigstens etwas. Und wehe, jetzt hockt nur so ein Typ da, der labert. Ja, 3 Gigabyte, das war's, tschüss. Darauf habe ich gar keinen Bock. Ich möchte schon einen Typen da haben, der jetzt richtig sagt, ich bin geil und ich scheiß. Und dann zeigt er noch so ein paar Scheiße und dann war's das. Ja, und jetzt geht's los. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hi. Unfortunately, we had to cancel the talk that we had planned for GDC. But we do have some super exciting news about PS5. And who better to bring that to you?
Das sind Fake-Leute im Publikum.
Without further ado, over to you, Mark.
Trash Greenscreen. Verpiss dich bitte.
There will be lots of chances later on this year to look at the PlayStation 5 games. Today, I want to talk a bit about our goals for the PlayStation 5 hardware and how they influenced the development of the console. I think you all know, I'm a big believer in
Ja, Digga, jetzt wird revealed das Design. Ich schwör, PS3 sah am besten aus. Richtig fetter Nazi. Guck euch das mal an, Digga. Fat Lady.
Game developers, hopefully not too overwhelming, and soon there's games that could never have been created before. Now, it used to be that as a console designer, you'd somehow intuit what would be the best set of
Hoffentlich sieht es wirklich aus wie eine V, Alter.
build it in complete secrecy. For the PlayStation consoles, that period lasted through PlayStation 3.
Der Typ ist ein bisschen
a
meme,
powerful
finde ich.
and groundbreaking console, but also one that caused quite a lot of heartache, as it was initially difficult to develop games. So, starting with PlayStation 4, we've taken a different approach, roughly centered around 3 principles. The first of these is listening to the developers.
Ah ja, auf einmal wird auf Entwickler gehört.
A lot of what we put into a console derives directly from the needs and aspirations of the game creators. We definitely do have some ideas of our own, but at the core of our philosophy for designing consoles is that game players are here for the fantastic games. Which is to say that game
Zuschauer,
creators
geil, Digga.
matter. Anything we can do to make life easier for the game creators or help them realize their
Ein bisschen lauter, der
dreams, we
Spaß
will
redet
do.
zu leise für mich.
So, about once every 2 years, I take a tour of the industry. I go to the various developers and publishers, sit down, and discuss how they're doing with the current consoles and what they'd like to see in future consoles. This requires weeks on the road, as reaching the bulk of the game creators involves talking to well over 100 people at something like 24 publishers and developers. And it is incredibly valuable. By the way, the feature most requested by the developers, that was an SSD, which we were very happy
Oh
with.
ja,
The
wir haben der
hardware,
SSD
a lot
eingebaut, das
of
wissen wir
problem
schon.
was required. I'll be doing a deep dive
Bin
on
immer
the SSD
gespannt, wie viel
and
es haben
surrounding
wird. Auf
systems
einmal so eine
later on
1000
in the
Gigabyte
install.
SSD, ist klar, ne?
It's also key to make a generational leap while keeping the console sufficiently familiar to game developers. I think about this in terms of balancing evolution and revolution. Now, with PlayStation 1, 2, and 3, the target was a revolution each time with a brand new feature set. That was great in many ways, but time for the developers to
Ja.
get up and running got longer with each console. In the past, I've called this time to triangle. Here's what I had for those 3 consoles. To be clear, I'm not talking about time to make a game. Developers will be ambitious, and it may take them 6 years or so to realize their vision. What I'm talking about is that dead time before graphics and other aspects of game development are up and running, and trying to minimize that. On the other hand, if we're trying to reduce that dead time to 0, that means the hardware architecture
Bin ich der
can't
Einzige,
change
der
at all.
findet, dass
We're
der Typ einen
handcuffed.
so hart auf den
We
Sack
need
geht
to
gerade?
judge for each feature what value it adds and whether it's worth the increase in developer time needed to support it. So with PlayStation 4, we were able to strike a pretty good balance between performance and familiarity. We got required learning back to
Und ich
PlayStation
habe
1
null
levels.
Plan, was der
With
gerade
PS5,
labert.
The GPU was definitely the area we felt the most tension between adding new features and keeping a familiar programming model. Ultimately, I think we've ended up with something under a month of getting up to speed. And it feels like we're striking about the right balance. I'll go into a bit more detail later today about our philosophy with the GPU and the specific feature set that resulted from it. It's also very important for us, as the hardware team, to find new dreams, by which I mean something other than CPU performance, GPU performance, and the amount of RAM. The increase in graphics performance over the past 2 decades has been
Es
astonishing,
geht mir nur auf den
but
Sack, weil
there
der
are
gerade
other
das
areas
gleiche
where we
labert,
can
was
innovate
wir
and
schon
provide
wissen.
significant value to the game creators, and through them, the players. That's why the SSD was very much on our list of directions to explore, regardless of what came out of the conversations with game developers and publishers. The biggest feature in this category is the custom engine for audio. That's today's final topic. The push for vastly improved audio, and in particular 3D audio, isn't something that came out of the developer meetings. It's much more the
Jetzt
case
labert er
that
über
we had
3D-Sound, was
dreamed
wir auch
what
schon wissen.
might be possible 5 years from now, and then worked out a number of steps we could take to set us on that path. So here again are the 3 principles, the first being enabling the desires of developers to drive the hardware design. To me, the SSD really is the key to the next generation.
Ja,
It's
wissen wir
a
auch.
game changer. And it was the #1 ask from developers for PlayStation 5. As in, we know it's probably impossible, but can you put an SSD in it? That was a discussion we were also having internally. It was clear that the presence of a hard drive in every PlayStation 4 was having a positive impact. A lot of things that would simply have been impossible at Blu-ray disc speeds were now possible. At the same time, though, in 2015 and 2016, when we were having these conversations, developers were already banging up against the limits of the hard drive, and a lot of developer time was being spent designing around slow load speeds. I want to focus in on just one number here, which is how long it takes to load a gigabyte of data from a hard drive. The difficulty being that hard drives are neither particularly fast nor flexible. If all your data is in one block, which is frankly not very likely, you can load 50 to 100 megabytes a second, depending on where the data is located on the hard drive. Let's assume it's on the outer edge, which means loading a gigabyte takes 10 seconds. If you compress your game packages, you can fit more data on the Blu-ray disc and also effectively boost your hard drive read speed by the
Big
compression ratio.
Mathe-Formeln kommen jetzt.
We support zlib decompression on PlayStation 4.
Ja, wir wissen, dass eine SSD besser ist als eine HDD.
And
Braucht uns nicht
50%
erklären.
higher effective read speed. Unfortunately, though, it's highly likely that your data is scattered around in various files on the hard drive, as well as sourced from multiple locations within those files. So lots of seeks are needed at 2 to 50-ish milliseconds each. My rule of thumb is that the hard drive is spending 2/3 of its time seeking, and only 1/3 of its time actually loading data. Putting all of that together, a gigabyte is very roughly 20 seconds to load from a hard drive. Now, a gigabyte is not much data. Games are using 5 or 6 gigabytes of RAM on PlayStation 4, so boot times and load times can get pretty grim. Or to put that differently, as a player, you wait for the game to boot, wait for the game to load, wait for the level to reload every time you die, and you wait for what is euphemistically called fast travel. And all of that leads to the dream. What if we could have not just an SSD, but a blindingly fast SSD?
Wow.
If we could load 5 gigabytes a
5
second,
Gigabyte in der
what
Sekunde,
would
ja, das wäre
change?
schon mal...
Now, SSDs are
Shush.
completely different from hard drives. They
Ja, aber das
don't
ist ja eine
have
SSD.
seeks as such. If you have a 5 gigabyte a second SSD, you can read data from 1,000 different locations in that second, pretty much at speed. As for time to load a gigabyte, this is next gen.
Aber ich hoffe auf jeden Fall, die wollen es jetzt nicht als hauptneues Feature verkaufen. Ui, wir haben eine SSD drin, das geht alles 5-mal schneller. Ist zwar geil und so, klar, aber als Hauptargument wäre das schon ein bisschen schwul und längst überfällig vor allem.
100 times faster. Which means at 5 gigabytes a second for the SSD, the potential is that the game boots in a second. There are no load screens. The game just fades down while loading
Wenigstens
a
lädt dann
half
alles
dozen
nicht mehr
gigabytes
lange.
and fades back up again. Same for a reload. You're immediately back in the action after you die. And fast travel becomes so fast it's blink and you miss it. As game creators, we go from trying to distract the player from how long fast travel is taking, like those Spider-Man subway rides, to being so blindingly fast that we might even have to slow that transition down. Pretty cool, right? But for me, this is not the primary reason to change from a hard drive to an SSD. The primary reason for an ultra-fast SSD is that it gives the game designer freedom. Or to put that differently, with a hard drive, the 20 seconds that it takes to load a gigabyte can sabotage the game
Frage ist, wie
that the
viel
developer
Gigabyte
is
SSD
trying
wird's
to
haben,
create.
ne?
I think
Mit
almost all of
250
us in
kannst
the
du nicht viel
room have
anfangen.
experienced this, maybe in different ways. Say we're making an adventure game and we have two rich environments where we each want enough textures and models to fill memory, which you can do as long as you have a long staircase or elevator ride or a windy corridor where you can ditch the old assets and then take 30 seconds or so to load the new assets. Having a 30-second elevator ride is a little extreme. More realistically, we'd probably chop the world into a number of smaller pieces and then do some calculations with sight lines and run speeds like we did for Haven City when we were making Jack 2. The game is 20 years old, but not much has changed since then. All those twisty passages are there for a reason. There's a whole subset of level design dedicated to this sort of work, but still, it's a giant distraction for a team that just wants to make their game. So when I talked about the dream of an SSD, part of the reason for that 5 gigabyte a second target was to eliminate loads, but also part of the reason for that target was streaming. As in, what if the SSD is so fast that as the player is turning around, it's possible to load textures for everything behind the player in that split second? If you figure that it takes half a second to turn, that's 4 gigabytes of compressed data you can load. That sounds about right for next gen. Anyway, back to the hard drive. Another strategy for increasing effective read speed is to make big sequential chunks of data. For example, we might group all the data together for each city block. That removes most of the seeks, and the streaming gets faster. But there's a downside too, which is that frequently used data is included in many chunks.
Ja, also
and
ich
therefore is on
bezweifle
the
es,
hard
glaube ich,
drive
will noch was sehen.
many,
Ich glaube, der
many
labert jetzt
times.
10, 20 Minuten über ein paar
Marvel's
Sachen,
Spider-Man
das
uses
war's.
this strategy, and though it works very well for increasing the streaming speed, there's a massive
Aber wer weiß.
duplication as a result. Some of the objects like mailboxes or news racks are on the hard drive 400 times. What I'm describing here are things that cramp a creative director's style. Either level design gets a little bit boring in places, or the data is duplicated so many times that it no longer fits on the Blu-ray disc. And you end up with hard limits on the player's run speed or driving speed. The player can't go faster than the load speed from the hard drive. And finally, I'm sure many of you have
jetzt wird's
noticed that
interessant.
after a patch download, the PlayStation 4
Oh ja,
doesn't
wäre
take a
voll
long
geil, wenn die
time
Kacke
to
schneller
install.
installieren. Das wäre super geil.
That's because when just part of a file has been changed, the new data can be downloaded pretty quickly. But before the game boots up, a brand new file has to be constructed that includes the changed portion. Otherwise, every change would add a seek or two. Even so, you can occasionally see this happening on game titles. They start to hitch once they get patched enough. With an SSD, though, no seeks, so no need to make brand new files with the changes incorporated into them, which means no installs as you know them today. There's yet one more benefit.
Oh, jetzt wird's
is that
spannend.
System memory can be used much
Das wissen
more
wir noch nicht.
efficiently. On PlayStation 4, game data on the hard drive feels very distant and difficult
Echt,
to
die
use.
PS4 hat
By
nur
the
8
time you
GB
realize you
RAM.
need a piece of data, it's much too late to go out and
War
load
nicht
it.
irgendwas
So
mit
system
10
memory has to contain all of the data
Pro,
that can be used
meine
in
ich
the
jetzt?
next 30 seconds or so
Okay.
of gameplay. That means a lot of the
Also
8
8 ist ja
gigabytes
schon
of
wenig
system memory
inzwischen, ne?
is idle. It's just waiting there to be potentially used. On PlayStation 5, though, the
Ah,
SSD is
16,
very
das
close
ist
to
doch schon
being
mal
like
gut.
more RAM. Typically, it's
Ist
fast
zwar auch
enough that
für
when you realize you
heutzutage
need a
nur
piece
noch
of
recht
data,
Standard,
you can just load it from the SSD and use it.
aber
There's no
die
need to have
DDR6,
lots
das
of
ist
data
schon mal
parked
gut.
in system memory waiting to potentially be used. A different way of saying that is that most
Das
of
ist doch schon
RAM
mal schön.
is working
Da,
on the
da
game's
läuft
behalf.
was.
This is one of the reasons that 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 feels right for PlayStation 5. The presence of the SSD reduces the need for a massive intergenerational increase in size. So back to the dream of the SSD. Here's the set of targets. Boot the game in a second.
Dieser
No load
Flex mit der
screens.
SSD, es ist zu krank.
Design freedom, meaning no twisty passages or long corridors. more game on the disk and more game on the SSD, and finally, those patch installs go away.
Ja, Gott sei Dank, bei
The
Destiny ist es
reality,
ja
though, is that
Albtraum.
the SSD
Wenn er
is
ein
just
Update
one piece
installiert,
of
dauert
the
ja
puzzle.
Jahre,
There's
bis er es
a lot
fertig
of
gemacht hat.
places where bottlenecks can occur in between the SSD and the game code that uses the data.
God of War
You can see
2
this on PlayStation 4.
Reveal
If I use an
links.
SSD with 10 times the
Spaß.
speed of a standard hard drive, I probably see only double the loading speed, if that. For PlayStation 5, our goal was not just that the SSD itself be 100 times faster. It was that game loads and streaming would be 100 times faster. So every
Ja, das ist doch
single
schön.
potential
Wenn sie
bottleneck
schon mal
needed
ein
to be
bisschen was
addressed.
dafür machen, dass
And
die
there are
SSD
a
sich auch
lot of
lohnt.
them. Let's look at check-in and what happens when its overhead gets 100 times larger. Conceptually, check-in is a pretty simple process. Data is loaded into system memory from the hard drive or SSD. It's examined. A few values are tweaked to check it in, and then it's moved to its final location. At the SSD speeds we're talking about, that last part, moving the data, meaning copying it from one location to another, takes roughly an entire next-gen CPU core. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. If all the overheads get 100 times larger, that will cripple the frame rate as soon as the player moves, and that massive stream of data starts
Jim
coming
Ryan
off
oder
the SSD.
Sean Hayden oder
So
wie
to
der heißt,
solve
ist
all
cooler
that, we
als der
built a
Dojo.
lot of custom hardware, namely a custom flash controller and a number of custom units in our main chip.
Oh.
The flash controller in the SSD was designed for smooth and bottleneck-free operation, but also with games in mind. For example, there are 6 levels of priority when reading from the SSD. Priority is very important. You can imagine the player heading into some new location in the world and the game requesting a few gigabytes of textures. And while those textures are being loaded, an enemy is shot and has to speak a few dying words. Having multiple priority levels lets the audio for those dying words get loaded immediately. On one side, that flash controller connects to the actual flash dies that supply the storage. To reach our bandwidth target of 5 gigabytes a second, we ended up with a
natürlich auch
12-channel interface. 8 channels wouldn't be enough. Gigabytes a second. With a 12-channel interface, the resulting bandwidth we've achieved is actually 5.5
Die Frage ist natürlich auch,
With a 12-channel interface, the most natural size
ob jede
that
SSD
emerges from an
reinpasst oder nur
SSD
Sony
is
bestimmte, ne?
825 gigabytes.
Aber ich denke schon,
The
jede
key
SSD wäre
question
schon
for us
räudig.
was, is that enough? I mean, it's tempting to add more, but Flash certainly doesn't come cheap, and we have a responsibility to our gaming audience to be cost-effective with regards to what we put in the console. Ultimately, we resolved this question by looking at the play patterns of a broad range of gamers. We examined the specific games that they were playing over the course of a weekend or a week or a month, and whether that set of games would fit properly on the SSD. We were able to establish that the friction caused by reinstalls or redownloads would be quite low, and so we locked in on that 825 gigabyte size, while also preparing multiple strategies so that those who want more storage can add it. I'll go through the details in a moment. Back to the flash controller. On the other side, it connects to our main custom chip via
825
4
gigabyte
lanes of
SSD.
Gen 4 PCIe. And inside the main custom chip is a pretty hefty unit dedicated to I/O. Before we talk about what that does, let's talk compression for a moment. PlayStation 4 used zlib as its compression format. We decided to use it again on PlayStation 5, but on my 2017 tour of developers, I learned about a new format called Kraken from Rad Game Tools. It's like zlib's smarter cousin. Simple, similar types of algorithms.
Das Ding ist halt
but
auch, als ob
about
irgendwelche
10%
Leute,
better
also
compression, which is
normale
pretty big.
Leute,
That means 10%
jetzt
more games on the
ausführlich
UHD
raffen, was der da
Blu-ray disc
labert.
or on the SSD.
Graf ja
Kraken
nicht
had
mal
only
ich
been out
komplett.
for a year, but it was already becoming a
Aber
de
so
facto
halbwegs weiß ich schon,
industry
was du
standard.
meinst. Aber
Half of the teams I talked to were either using it
also
or getting
irgendwelche
ready
Kiddos,
to
die jetzt da
evaluate it.
gucken und sich
So we
denken, boah,
hustled and
PS5,
built a custom decompressor
das
into
jetzt
the I/O
ausführlich
unit,
raffen, was der
one
da will.
capable of handling over 5 gigabytes of Kraken format input data a second. After decompression, that typically becomes
Xbox hat
8
es zum
or 9
Beispiel so
gigabytes, but the
gelöst, die
unit
haben da,
itself is capable of outputting as
ist eh
much
fake,
as
das Video.
22
Ich hab am Maul.
gigabytes a second if the data happen to compress particularly well. By the way, in terms of performance, that custom decompressor equates to 9 of our Zen 2 cores. That's what it would take to decompress the Kraken stream with a conventional
wäre richtig
CPU.
billig, wenn da jetzt
There's a lot more in the
die
custom
SSD wirklich nur
IO,
800
including a
Gigabyte groß wäre
dedicated DMA controller, the game can
und
direct
nur einmal
exactly
drin ist,
where
oh
it
mein
wants to
Gott, da hat
send
man
the
ja noch
data coming
weniger
off
als
of
bei
the
Dings.
SSD. This equates to another Zen 2 core or 2 in terms of its copy performance. Its primary purpose is to remove check-in as a bottleneck. There's 2 dedicated I/O coprocessors and a large RAM pool. These aren't Zen 2 cores. They're there principally to direct the variety of custom hardware.
Und die Frage ist natürlich auch, ob man zwingend eine
One of
SSD
the
nutzen
coprocessors
muss
is
oder ob man da
dedicated
auch
to
seine
SSD I/O.
2
This
Terabyte
lets us
HDD wie bei
bypass
mir
traditional file
einfach
I/O and its
reinballern kann.
bottlenecks when reading from the SSD. The other is responsible for memory mapping, which I know doesn't sound like anything related to the SSD, but a lot of developers map and remap memory as part of file I/O, and this too can become a bottleneck. There are coherency engines to assist the coprocessors. Coherency comes up a lot in places. Probably the biggest coherency issue is stale data in the GPU caches. Flushing all of the GPU caches whenever the
Es
SSD
ist
is read
alles
is an
hingelangweilt.
unattractive option. It could really hurt the GPU performance. So we've
Boring.
implemented a gentler way
Ist
of doing
wirklich so,
things,
Digga.
where the coherency engines inform the GPU of the overwritten address ranges, and custom scrubbers in several dozen GPU caches do
Alles sind
pinpoint
getriggert vom
evictions of just
SSD-Flex.
those address ranges. The best thing is, as a game developer, when you read from the SSD, you don't need to know any of this. You don't even need to know that your data is compressed. You just indicate what data you'd like to read from your original uncompressed file and where you'd like to put it.
Für
And
mich
the
kommt es
whole
einfach nur
process
rüber, als
of
ob das
loading it
so ein Werbevideo
happens
ist für
invisibly to you
Entwickler.
and at very
Damit die
high
Entwickler
speed.
Bescheid wissen, boah, guck
Back
mal,
to the
voll
dream.
cool.
Thanks to all of that surrounding hardware, our 5.5 gigabytes a second really should translate into something like 100 times faster I/O than PS4 and allow the dream of no load screens and super fast streaming to become a reality. Having said that, expandability of our SSD is going to be quite important. Flash is costly, and you may very well want to add storage to whatever we put in the console. Now, the kind of storage you need depends on how you're going to use it. If you have an extensive PlayStation 4 library and you'd like to take advantage of backwards compatibility to play those games on PlayStation 5, then a large external hard drive is ideal. You can leave your games on the hard drive and play them directly from there, thus saving the pricier SSD storage for your PlayStation 5 titles, or you can copy your active PlayStation 4 titles to the
Externe
SSD.
HDD.
If your purpose in adding more
Muss man die
storage
per
is to
USB
play
anschließen oder
PlayStation
was?
5 titles, though, ideally you would
Gott.
add to your SSD storage. We will be supporting certain M2 SSDs. These are internal drives that you can get on the open market and install in a bay in the PlayStation 5. As for which
Cool.
ones we support and when, I'll get to that in a moment. They connect through the custom I/O unit, just like our SSD does. So they can take full
Also man kann
advantage of
bestimmte andere
decompression,
SSDs
I/O
noch kaufen.
coprocessors, and all the other features I was talking about.
Das ist doch schön.
Here's the catch, though. That commercial drive has to be at least as fast as ours. Games that rely on the speed of our SSD need to work flawlessly with any M2 drive. When I gave the Wired interview last year, I
Aber
said
keine läuft besser
PlayStation
als die
5
PS5
SSD was
OG
faster
himself
than
natürlich, ne?
anything available on PC. At the time, commercial M2 drives used PCIe 3.0, and 4 lanes of that cap out at 3.5 gigabytes a second. In other words, no PCIe 3.0 drive can hit the required spec. M2 drives with PCIe 4.0 are now out in the market. We're getting our samples and seeing 4 or 5 gigabytes a second from them. By year's end, I expect there will be drives that saturate 4.0 and support 7 gigabytes a second. Having said that, we are comparing apples and oranges, though, because that commercial M2 drive will have its own architecture, its own flash controller, and so on. For example, the NVMe specification lays out a priority scheme for requests that
Da
the
hocken
M2
wirklich
drives
Leute.
can
Ich
meet.
dachte, es wären
And
irgendwelche
that scheme
CGI-Leute,
is
lol.
pretty nice, but it only has 2 true priority levels. Our drive supports 6. We can hook up a drive with only 2 priority levels, definitely, but our custom I/O unit has to arbitrate the extra priorities rather than the M2 drive's flash controller. And so the M2 drive needs a little extra speed to take care of issues arising from the different approach. That commercial drive also needs to physically
Flex,
fit
Digga.
inside of the bay we created in PlayStation 5 for M2 drives. Unlike internal hard drives, there's unfortunately no standard for the height of an M2 drive. and some M2 drives have giant heat sinks. In fact,
Meine
some of them
einzige
even have
Frage
their
ist
own
nach
fan.
wie vor, wie groß ist die
Right now,
SSD
we're getting M2 drive samples and benchmarking them in
und
various
ob ich
ways.
eine HDD
When
notfalls auch
games
reinmachen
hit
kann.
beta as they get ready for the PlayStation
Weil
5
über
launch at
USB-Festplatten,
year-end,
das
we'll also be
ist mir
doing
zu
some
blöd
compatibility
persönlich. Also
testing to make sure that the architecture of
nicht so
particular
meins.
M2
Wäre natürlich am
drives
geilsten,
isn't
wenn man
too foreign for the games
zwei
behind.
Festplatten einbauen kann, wie
Once
am
we've
PC
done
oder
that
so.
compatibility testing,
Aber
we
ich
should be able
glaube
to
nicht,
start
dass das
letting you
möglich
know
ist.
which drives will physically fit and which drive samples have benchmarked appropriately high in our testing. It would be great if that happened by launch, but it's likely to be a bit past it. So please hold off on getting that M2 drive until you hear from us. Okay, back to our principles. Balancing evolution and revolution is the second of them. This was definitely a recurring theme
raus.
with the GPU. We need new GPU features and capabilities. If we only have more performance, it's not really a new generation of console. Of course, many of these capabilities result in more performance. That's part of why a PlayStation 5 teraflop is more powerful than
Das
a
Problem ist
PlayStation 4
einfach,
teraflop. But we aren't just
was
looking
willst
for
du
the
jetzt noch
performance.
groß
We
für den
also
Superfortschritt
need the
machen? Beim
ability
PS2
to
auf
do
PS3
something
war ein
with the GPU
Riesenschwung,
that could
genauso wie
not have
PS1
been
auf
done
PS2.
before.
Aber jetzt PS4 auf
And we
PS5,
need higher performance
ne,
per watt.
ist ein
Every
bisschen
time we
schwieriger
double the
da,
performance of some
so einen
GPU
super
component, we don't want to
neuen
find
Sprung
out
zu
we've
machen.
doubled
Ne?
the power
Deswegen
consumed
versucht
and
er
the
halt
heat
gerade
produced.
diesen Sprung,
But at
die
the
die
same
jetzt machen, zu
time, we have to
erklären.
make sure the GPU
Ausführlich.
can run PS4 games, and we have to ensure
Ja,
that the
backwards!
architecture is easy
Ja!
for the developers to
Bitte
adopt.
PS3!
Now, backwards compatibility was handled masterfully by AMD. They treated it as a key need throughout the design process. As our solution to adding new features without blindsiding developers, we
Neue
made sure
Features,
that
bin
if
mal
there
gespannt.
were new significant features, it would be optional to use them. The GPU supports ray tracing, but you don't have to use ray tracing to make your game. The GPU supports
Ray Trace
primitive
wird
shaders, but
unterstützt,
you
sehr
can
schön.
release your first game on PlayStation 5 without making any use of them. Before I get into the capabilities of the GPU, I'd like to make clear 2 points that can be quite confusing. First, we have a custom AMD GPU based on their RDNA 2 technology. What does that mean?
Wieder
AMD
AMD-Prozessor.
is continuously
schaust du das?
improving and revising
Pornhub.
their tech. For RDNA 2, their
Wo
goals were,
sonst?
roughly speaking, to reduce power consumption by re-architecting the GPU to put data close to where it's needed, to optimize the GPU for performance, and to add a new, more advanced feature set. But that feature set is malleable, which is to say that we have our own needs for
Wenn du es genau wissen willst, auf
and
meinem
that can
PC.
factor into what the AMD roadmap becomes.
Was
So,
geht? Nichts
collaboration is
PlayStation
born.
Time.
If we bring
Auch wenn
concepts to
nur
AMD that
flexen
are
tut
felt to be widely
mit ein paar
useful, then they can be
Komponenten.
adopted into RDNA 2 and used broadly, including in PC GPUs. If the ideas are sufficiently specific to what we're trying to accomplish, like the GPU cache scrubbers I was talking about, then they end up being just for us. If you see a similar discrete GPU available as a PC card at roughly the same time as we release our console, that means our collaboration with AMD
Ja, auf Pornhub, wo
succeeded,
sonst?
in producing technology useful in both worlds. It doesn't mean that we as Sony simply incorporated the PC part into our console. This continuous improvement in AMD technology means it's dangerous to rely on teraflops as an absolute indicator of performance. And CU
Gleich
count
wird
should be
reviewed, wie viel
avoided as well.
Teraflops.
In the case of CPUs, we all understand this. The PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 each have 8
Ich tippe auf
CPUs,
12.
but we never think that meant the capability
Keine
or
Ahnung, wie viel die
performance
PS4 hat
were equal.
tatsächlich.
It's the same for CUs. For one thing,
Aber
they've
mehr
been
als
getting
6 sollte
much
die PS4
larger
Pro
over
nicht
time.
haben.
Adding new features means adding lots of transistors.
Also sollte
In
schon
fact,
doppelt so
the
viel haben.
transistor count for a PlayStation 5 CU is 62% larger than the transistor count for a PlayStation 4 CU. Second, the PlayStation 5 GPU is backwards compatible with PlayStation 4. What does
Ja.
that mean? One way you can achieve backwards compatibility is to
Ja.
put the previous console's chipset in the new console, like we did with some PlayStation 3s. But that's, of course, extremely expensive. A better way is to incorporate any differences in the previous console's logic into the new console's custom chips, meaning that even as the technology evolves, the logic and feature set that PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro titles rely
Ja, da
on
fehlt noch eine
is
3.
still available in backwards compatibility modes. One advantage of this strategy
Guck,
is
da sind
that
noch 2 Dinger
once
frei, da
backwards
kommt safe eine
compatibility is
PS3
in the
noch.
console, it's in. It's not as if a cost down will remove backwards compatibility like it did on PlayStation 3. Achieving this unification of functionality to
Muss noch mal kurz
console, it's
zuhören,
when title
ohne zwischenzulabern.
technology evolves, the logic and feature set that PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro titles rely on is still available in backwards compatibility modes. One advantage of this strategy is that once backwards compatibility is in the console, it's in. It's not as if a cost down will remove backwards compatibility like it did on PlayStation 3. Achieving this unification of functionality took years of efforts by AMD.
Ja, der hat jetzt nichts
as any
gesagt, ne?
roadmap advancement creates a
Als
potential
ob's wieder nicht
divergence in
PS3
logic.
ist. Ich scheiß dem
Running
ins Gesicht.
PS4 and PS4 titles at boosted frequencies has also added complexity. The boost is truly massive this time around, and some game code just can't handle it. Testing has to be done on a title-by-title basis. Results are excellent, though. We recently took a look at the top 100 PlayStation 4 titles as ranked by playtime, and we're expecting almost all of them to be playable at launch on PlayStation 5.
Ja, schön, was mit
With
PS3?
regards to new features, as I
Ach
said,
ja.
our strategy was to try to break new ground, but at the same time not to require use of the new GPU
Bestimmt,
capabilities.
wenn
For more
überhaupt,
than a
wird's als
decade,
super Überraschung
GPUs have
revealed noch.
imposed a restriction on game engines. Software handles vertex processing, but for the most part, dedicated hardware is responsible for the triangles and other geometry that the vertices form. That means it's not possible to do even basic optimizations, such as aborting processing of a vertex if all geometry that uses it is off-screen. PlayStation 5 has a new unit called the Geometry Engine, which brings handling of triangles and other primitives under full programmatic control.
Ich meine,
As
so
a game
tragisch ist es
developer,
jetzt
you're
nicht,
free to ignore its existence
weil
and use
ich
the
habe noch
PlayStation
eine
5 GPU as if it were no more
PS3,
capable
aber
than the PS4 GPU. Or
das wäre
you
so
can use this new
asozial, Digga,
intelligence
wenn
in
jetzt
various
wirklich
ways.
nur PS4
Simple usage could be performance
Abwärtskompatibilität wäre.
optimization, such as removing backfaced or off-screen vertices and triangles. More complex usage involves something called primitive shaders, which allow the game to synthesize geometry on the fly as it's being rendered. It's a brand new capability. Using primitive shaders on PlayStation 5 will allow for a broad variety of techniques, including smoothly varying level of detail, addition of procedural detail to close-up objects, and improvements to particle effects and other visual special effects. Another major new feature of our
Das
custom
Ray
RDNA2
Tracing,
based
Sieg fucking
GPU
Heil.
is ray tracing, using the same strategy as AMD's upcoming PC GPUs. The CUs contain a new specialized unit called the intersection engine, which can calculate
Cool
the
shit.
intersection of rays with boxes and triangles. To use the intersection engine, first you build what is called an acceleration structure. It's data in RAM that contains all of your geometry. There's a specific set of formats you can use. They're variations on the same BVH concept. Then, in your shader program, you use a new instruction that asks the intersection engine to check a ray against the BVH. While the intersection engine is processing the requested ray triangle or ray box intersections, the shaders are free to do other work. Having said that, the ray tracing instruction is pretty memory intensive, so it's a good mix with logic-heavy code. There's of course no need to use ray tracing. PS4 graphics engines will run just fine on PlayStation 5, but it presents an opportunity for those interested. I'm thinking it'll take less than 1 million rays a second to have a big impact on audio. That should be enough for tested in engines with only modest costs. Another set of issues for the GPU involved size and frequency. How big do we make the GPU, and what frequency do we run it at? This is a balancing act. The chip has a cost, and there's a cost for whatever we use to supply that chip with power and to cool it. In general, I like running the GPU at higher frequency. Let me show you why. Here's 2 possible configurations for a GPU roughly of the level of the
Schon
PlayStation
wieder
4
der
Pro.
Flex.
This is a thought experiment.
Weißt
Don't
du, das
take these configurations too
Interessanteste geht er
seriously.
5 Sekunden drauf
If you
ein
just calculate
und sagt,
teraflops
ja,
to
das
get
haben
the
wir bei der
same number,
PS3 nicht gemacht, aber
but
jetzt machen wir
actually the
das bei der
performance is
PS4, also hier.
noticeably different
Und das
because
war's.
teraflops is defined
Den
as the
Rest, wo sich
computational
kaum einer drum
capability of
juckt,
the vector
muss er
ALU.
unbedingt jetzt 1
That's
Million
just
Jahre
one part
erklären.
of the GPU. There
Ja,
are
okay,
a
aber jetzt
lot of
versucht
other
er gerade
units.
Teraflops zu
And those other
revealen.
units all run faster when the GPU
Hau mal raus,
frequency is
hoffentlich
higher.
12.
At 33%
Oder
higher
13 am
frequency,
besten, haben wir Xbox
rasterization
gefickt, finde
goes
ich auch noch cool.
33% faster.
glaub
Processing
ich
the
nicht.
command buffer goes that much faster. The L2 and other caches have that much higher bandwidth, and so on. About the only downside is that system memory is 33% further away in terms of cycles. But the large number of benefits more than counterbalance that. As a friend of mine says, a rising tide lifts all boats. Also, it's easier to fully use 36 CUs in parallel than it is to fully use 48 CUs. When triangles are small, it's much harder to fill all those CUs with useful work. So there's a lot to be said for faster, assuming you can handle the resulting power and heat issues, which frankly, we haven't always done the best job at. Part of the reason for that is, historically, our process for setting CPU and GPU frequencies has relied on some heavy-duty guesswork with regards to how much electrical power games will consume and how much heat will be produced as a result inside of the console. Power consumption varies a lot from game to game. When I play God of War on my PS4 Pro, I know the power consumption is high just by the fan noise. But power isn't simply about
Lüfter, jetzt wird's
quality.
spannend.
It's about the minutiae of what's being displayed and how. It's counterintuitive, but processing dense geometry typically consumes less power than processing simple geometry, which is, I suspect, why Horizon's map screen, with its low triangle count, makes my PS4 Pro heat up so much. Our process on previous consoles has been to try to guess what the maximum power consumption during the entire console lifetime might be, which is to say, the worst case scene in the worst case game, and prepare a cooling solution that we think will be quiet at that power level. If we get it right, fan noise is minimal. If we get it wrong, the console will be quite loud for the higher power games, and there's even a chance that it might overheat and shut down if we misestimate power too badly. PlayStation 5 is especially challenging because the CPU supports 256-bit native instructions that consume a lot of power. These are great here and there, but presumably only minimally used. Or are they? If we plan for major 256-bit instruction usage, we need to set the CPU clock substantially lower or noticeably increase the size of the power supply and fan.
Spannend aktuell.
So, after much discussion, we decided to go with a very different direction on PlayStation 5. We built a GPU with 36 CUs. Mind you, RDNA2 CUs are large. Each has 62% more transistors than the CUs we were using on PlayStation 4. So if we compare transistor counts, 36 RDNA2 CUs equates to roughly 58 PlayStation 4 CUs. It is a fairly sizable GPU. Then we went with a variable frequency strategy for PlayStation 5, which is to say we continuously run the GPU and CPU in boost mode. We supply a generous amount of electrical power and then increase the frequency of GPU and CPU until they reach the capabilities of the system's cooling solution.
Ob da noch was
It's a
stabil läuft.
completely different paradigm. Rather than running at constant frequency and letting power vary based on the workload, we run at essentially constant power and let the frequency vary based on the workload. We then tackled the engineering challenge of a cost-effective and high-performance cooling solution designed for that specific power level. In some ways, it becomes a simpler problem because there are no more unknowns. There's no need to guess what power consumption the worst-case game might have. As for the details of the cooling solution, we're saving them for our teardown. I think you'll be quite happy with what
mich
the
aber auch ein bisschen an
engineering
Michael
team
Bay,
came
ne?
up with.
Ein bisschen anders da, noch ein
So,
jünger.
how fast can we run the GPU and CPU with this strategy?
Oh,
The simplest approach would be to look at the actual temperature of the silicon die and throttle the frequency on that basis. But that won't work. It fails to create a consistent PlayStation 5 experience. It wouldn't do to run a console slower simply because it was in a hot room. So rather than look at the actual temperature of the silicon die, we look at the activities that the GPU and CPU are performing and set the frequencies on that basis, which makes everything deterministic and repeatable. While we're at it, we also use AMD's Smart Shift technology and send any unused power from the CPU to the GPU so it can squeeze out a few more pixels.
Alter, die Stromrechnung tut
Benefits
mir
of
leid tun,
this
Digga.
strategy are quite large.
Heilige
Running
Scheiße.
a GPU at 2
Das
GHz
heißt,
was
du musst
looking
immer
like an
maximal viel
unreachable
Strom
target with the
nutzen, um
old
das
fixed
bestmöglich zu
frequency
nutzen.
strategy. With this new paradigm, we're able to run way over that. In fact, we have to cap the GPU frequency at 2.23 gigahertz so that we can guarantee that the on-chip logic operates properly. 36 CUs at 2.23 gigahertz is 10.3 teraflops, and we expect the GPU to spend most of its time
Ach
at
du
or close
heilige
to that
Scheiße.
frequency and performance. Similarly, running the CPU
Bei
at
Xbox
3
waren's
gigahertz
12,
was causing
ne?
headaches with the old strategy. but now we can run it as high as 3.5 gigahertz. In fact, it spends most of its time at that frequency.
Oder Plot
That
Twist?
doesn't mean all games will be running at 2.23 gigahertz and 3.5 gigahertz. When that worst-case game arrives, it will run at a lower clock speed, but not too much lower. To reduce power by 10%, it only takes a couple of percent reduction in frequency. So
Chat
I'd
rastet
expect
gerade
any
live aus.
downclocking to be pretty minor. All things considered, the change to a variable frequency approach will show significant gains for
Xbox
PlayStation
One, alle holen
gamers.
sich einen runter.
The final of our three principles was about finding new dreams. It's important for us on the hardware team to find new ways to expand or deepen gaming, and that's what led us to a focus on 3D audio. As players, we
Ja, ich meine, mir ist
games through
scheißegal,
the
ich kauf
visuals,
sowieso
through audio, and through the
PlayStation.
feedback
Ich
we
wollte schon
receive
Xbox
from the
sagen,
controller,
wahrscheinlich.
such as rumble or haptics. Personally, I feel a game is just dead without audio. Visuals are, of course, important, but the impact
Ja,
of
gut,
audio
ne?
is huge as well. At the same time, the audio team on a game project has to do a lot with a little. For example, on PlayStation 4, there's fierce competition for the Jaguar CPU cores. Audio typically ends up getting just a fraction of a core. That's not much of a computational resource, particularly when you consider that the visuals run at 30 or 60 frames a second, but audio processing needs to happen at almost 200 times.
Ich meine, die
a
PS4
second.
Pro hat 4,2 Teraflops
So,
und die hat
it's been tough
10,8.
going
Das ist
with the
schon
forward progress in audio with PlayStation
das
4,
Doppelte.
particularly when PlayStation 3 was such a beast when it came to audio. The SPUs in Cell were almost a perfect device
Also
for
schon,
audio
finde ich
rendering.
cool.
Simple pipelined algorithms could
Das
really take
Dreifache hätte ich mir aber
advantage
schon
of
gewünscht,
asynchronous
ne?
DMA and frequently reach
12,5 hätte ich
100%
mir gewünscht,
utilization of
persönlich.
the floating point unit. There's unfortunately nothing
Aber,
comparable on
naja.
PlayStation 4. Probably the
Passt
most
schon.
dramatic progress in the PlayStation 4 generation has been with virtual reality.
Oh,
The PSVR hardware
VR
has its
shit.
own audio unit. It supports about 50 pretty decent 3D sound sources. And this
Oh,
provides
VR auf
a
der
hint
PS5 sieht
as to where
bestimmt
we can
geil
go
aus,
with
Alter.
audio, as well as some valuable
Boah.
experience. Not to oversimplify, but here were our goals for audio on PlayStation 5.
Geil, zeig
The
mal mehr
first
Audio.
goal was great audio for everyone, not just VR users or soundbar owners or headphone users. That meant audio had to be part of the console. It couldn't be a peripheral. The second goal was to support hundreds of sound sources. We didn't want developers to have to pick and choose what sounds would get 3D effects and which wouldn't. We wanted every sound in the game to have dimensionality. And finally, we wanted to really take on the challenges of presence and locality. Now, when we say presence, we mean the feeling that you're actually there. You've entered the matrix. It's not, of course, something we thought we could perfectly achieve, but the idea was that if we stopped using just a rain sound and instead used lots of 3D audio sources for raindrops hitting the ground at all sorts of locations around you, then at some point your brain would take a leap
Ja,
and
mach
begin to
Dolby
have
Atmos
this
rein,
feeling,
gut ist.
this feeling of real presence inside the virtual world of the game. This has the capacity to affect your appreciation of the game, just like music in a game does. The concept of locality is simpler. It's just your sense of where the audio is coming from, to the right of you, behind you, above you. This can immerse you further in the game, and it can also directly enhance the gameplay. To use Dead Space as an example, I know, old school, you're
I
fighting
know, old
enemies
school.
in fairly dark, spooky locations. Back in the day, if you played the game
Dead
using the
Space
TV
4.
speakers, you could tell that there was
Review.
one last enemy growling and hunting you down, but it was difficult to tell quite where that enemy was. With headphones, you could tell that the enemy was somewhere on the right, which let you deduce, if you couldn't see it, that it must be somewhere behind and to your right. But with 3D audio with good locality, the idea is you know the enemy is precisely there, and you turn and you take it out.
Bringt nichts, wenn du ein Ausgabegerät hast, was die ganze Scheiße nicht unterstützt, ne?
Well, all those bumps and folds
Kann
in
noch
the
so
ear
geil
have a
das
meaning,
verarbeitet werden.
evolutionarily speaking. Based on what direction the sound is coming from, sound waves bounce around inside
Mein
the
Gott.
ear, there's some constructive and destructive interference, and the result is a change in volume. The phase of the sound also shifts, depending on what path the sound wave took to reach the ear canal. These volume changes and phase shifts are different for each direction and also vary depending on the frequency of the sound. Head size and head shape also impact the sound in a similar fashion. The way that the sound changes, based on direction and frequency,
erklärt
can
uns
be
das
encoded
menschliche
in a
Ohr.
table called the Head-Related Transfer
Okay.
Function, or HRTF. Here's part of one. The vertical axis is the frequency. The horizontal axis is the direction, front, back, left, right, and the color gives the degree of attenuation of the sound at that frequency. The HRTF is as unique to an individual as a fingerprint is. In fact, you're looking at mine right now. Here's how we measure an HRTF. We've taken hundreds of people through this process. We put a microphone in the subject's left and right ear canals, and then sit the subject down in the middle of an array of 22 speakers. We then play an audio sweep from each speaker as we rotate the subject. In the course of 10 or 20 minutes, we're able to sample the HRTF at over 1,000 locations. Using an HRTF when rendering audio creates unparalleled quality.
Ja,
but
mach's
it's
noch komplexer,
computationally
oder? Das
expensive.
keiner mehr rafft.
The simplest way to
voll
use
okay,
an
Digga.
HRTF is to process a sound source to make it appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000 locations we sampled. Unfortunately, the processing has to be done in frequency domain rather than time domain, so there's multiple fast Fourier transforms needed for every sound source for every audio tick. That's a lot of multiplies. This computational complexity was the determining factor for our strategy. It meant we had to bite the bullet and design and build a custom hardware unit for 3D audio. Collectively, we're referring to the
Also
hardware
ganz
units
ehrlich,
and proprietary
es gibt
algorithms we run on it as Tempest. As a Tempest, I feel it
Es gibt
really
bestimmt 5
reflects
Leute,
our
denen es
goals with
interessiert.
audio. It suggests a certain
Aber ich bin
intensity of
keiner davon,
experience
Digga.
and also hints at your presence within it. We're calling the
Ich bin
hardware unit
halt
that
ein
we
bisschen
built
enttäuscht,
the
weil ich
Tempest
glaube,
engine.
wieder
It's based on
PS3 nicht
AMD's
unterstützt wird.
GPU technology. We
sondern nur
modified a
PS4.
compute unit in such a way as to make
Das
it
finde ich
very
halt scheiße.
close to the SPUs in PlayStation 3. Remember when I said that they were ideal
Die
for audio?
10,3, die jucken
So
mich
the
persönlich jetzt
Tempest
nicht viel.
engine has no
Hauptsache
caches,
besser
just like an SPU.
als PS4
All
Pro. Und das
data
ist ja
access is
anscheinend
via
doppelt so gut.
DMA, just like
Doppelt
an
an halb,
SPU.
also
Our
dreifach.
target was that it would have more power than a CPU, thanks to the parallelism that a GPU can achieve, and that it would be more efficient than our
Fast
GPU,
dreifach so
thanks to
gut.
the SPU-like architecture. The goal
Doppelt
being
an
to
halb
make
so gut wie der
possible near
PS4 Pro. Und das
100%
ist halt, finde ich,
utilization
voll
of the
okay.
CU's vector units. Where we ended up is a unit with roughly the same SIMD power and
nächsten 4
bandwidth
Jahre
as
wird's
all
reichen.
8 Jaguar cores in the PlayStation 4 combined. If we were to use the same algorithms as PSVR, that's enough for something like 5,000 sound sources. But of course, we want to use more complex algorithms, and we don't need anything like that number of sounds. It would have been wonderful if a simpler strategy, such as using Dolby Atmos peripherals, could have achieved our goals, but we wanted 3D audio for all, not just those with licensed soundbars or the like. Also, we wanted many hundreds of sound sources, not just the 32 that Atmos supports. And finally, we wanted to be able to throw an overwhelming amount of processing power at the problem, and it wasn't clear what any peripheral might have inside of it. In fact, with the Tempest engine, we've even got enough power that we can allocate some to the games, to the extent that games want to
Ja,
make
ich hab's
use
mir auch ein
of
bisschen spannender
convolution
erwartet,
reverb
ne?
and other algorithms that are either computationally expensive
48
or need
Minuten geht
high
es schon,
bandwidth.
Digga.
But the primary
Fick
purpose of the
meine
Tempest
Eier.
engine remains 3D audio.
Er hat fast nur
Now,
den heißen
3D
Brei
audio
geredet.
is a major academic research topic. It's safe to say that no one in the world has all of the answers. And the set of algorithms that has to be invented, tuned, or implemented to realize our vision for 3D audio is immense. For example, use of HRTFs in games is quite complex. Before, I talked about making a sound source appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000 HRTF sample locations. But for high-quality 3D game audio, we have to handle other possibilities.
Boah.
The sound source might not be at one of the 1,000
die
HRTF sample
Soundboss oder was?
locations, so we have to blend the
Sieht aus wie ein
HRTF data
Schallplan
from the
halb.
closest locations that we have set.
Alter.
The sound source might be moving, which needs very special handling as that blend keeps changing, and that can cause phase artifacts in the resulting audio. Or the sound source might have a size to it, meaning it should feel as if it's coming from an area rather than a single point. There's also whole categories of approaches to be handled. 3D audio can be implemented using individual processing of 3D sound sources. But alternatively, ambisonics can be used for 3D audio. Ambisonics being somewhat like the spherical harmonics used in computer graphics. And finally, there's audio devices. The player might be using headphones or TV speakers or
Ja,
have a higher-end
meistens
surround
Kopfhörer.
sound setup with 6 or more speakers, all of which need different approaches. That's a lot of variations. It's nice to have the computational resources of the Tempest engine, but it's clear that achieving our ultimate goals with 3D audio is going to be a multi-year, step-by-step process. Having said that, headphone audio implementation is largely complete at this time. It was a natural place for us to start. With headphones, we control exactly what each ear hears, and therefore the algorithmic development and implementation are more straightforward. For TV speakers and stereo speakers, we're in the process of implementing virtual surround sound. The idea being that if you're sitting in a sweet spot in front of the TV, then the sound can be made to feel as if it's coming from any direction, even behind you. Virtual surround sound has a lot in common with 3D audio on headphones, but it's more complex because the left ear can hear the right speaker and vice versa. We have a basic implementation of virtual surround sound up and running. We're now looking at increasing the size of that sweet spot, which is to say, making the area you need to be in to feel the 3D effect larger, and we're also working to boost the sense of locality. Headphone audio is the current gold standard for 3D audio on PlayStation 5, but we're going to see what we can do to bring virtual surround sound to a similar level, after which we'll start in on setups with more speakers, such as 6-channel surround sound.
Würde mich mal sehr interessieren,
It's now to the point
ob ihr
where
das
some of the
spannend findet
PlayStation 5 games in development are extensively using
oder
these
gut
systems.
findet oder keine Ahnung.
One of the game demos allows you to toggle between conventional PlayStation 4 style stereo audio and our new 3D audio. I listened with just an ordinary pair of over-the-ear headphones, and wow, I could feel a difference. 3D audio has that dimensional feel to it. Conventional stereo audio feels smashed flat by comparison. The improvement is obvious. So, a big advancement, but have I entered the matrix? Does my brain believe I'm really there, like I was talking about earlier when I explained our target of presence?
Ich bin nicht so
Well,
gut in
the
Englisch.
answer is no. But you've probably
Ja,
caught on to what's missing here.
Ich verstehe jetzt auch nicht
Namely,
100%,
whose
aber er labert
HRTF
eigentlich
was
nur um
being
heißen
used.
Brei herum.
It wasn't mine. It was the default HRTF. The audio team analyzed the hundreds of
Also
measures
was hat er
and
jetzt alles
chose the one they
gelabert?
felt was the closest fit to the total game playing audience.
CPU,
This shows a piece of the
Grafik,
default
SSD
HRTF
hat
on
am
the
Anfang
left,
ganz viel
and my
gelabert.
HRTF on the right. You can see that the general features are much the same,
SSD
but the details
820
are
GB,
quite
was
different.
echt nicht viel ist.
With the default HRTF, as I said, the 3D audio sounds pretty great.
CPU,
When I use
GPU
my
gut, 10
HRTF, though,
Teraflops.
the audio reaches a higher level
Nur
of realism,
PS4
which is to say that when using
Abwärtskompatibilität bis
headphones
jetzt.
and my HRTF,
Hoffentlich ändert sich
I
das noch.
occasionally get fooled and even think a sound is coming from the
Und
real
jetzt
world
labert er
when
über
it's
Sound.
actually coming from the game.
Neue Soundtechnologie, bla bla
A
bla.
corollary to this is that there are a few people whose HRTFs are sufficiently far from the default HRTF, that's the red dot here, that they can toggle between
Aber sieht
PS4
schlecht aus
style
mit
and
PS3
PS5
leider.
style audio and not
Finde ich
sense
sehr
much
schade.
difference. I've had a
Ich mir
few
wirklich mal
people
gewünscht.
describe the PlayStation 5's 3D
Das
audio as
PS2
sounding like
PS1 müsste
a
nicht
bit
mal sein,
better
Hauptsache
stereo
PS3.
audio. Presumably they're the ones at the very edges of this diagram.
Wenn ich keine
Which
PS3 mehr
means
nötig brauche,
what
aber
HRTF
ja.
you're using is key.
Ich habe zwar
I'd
eine,
like
aber
everyone to be able to experience what I'm experiencing, but obviously it's not possible to measure the HRTF of every PlayStation user. That means HRTF selection and synthesis are going to be big topics going forward as the Tempest technology matures. At PlayStation 5 launch, we'll be offering a choice of 5 HRTFs. There's a simple test where you pick the one that
Fünf.
gives you the best locality.
oh,
That's just the first step, though. This is an open-ended research topic. Maybe you'll be sending us a photo of
wenn
your
man
ear,
eine
and
PS5
we'll choose
einrichtet,
a
muss man eine
neural
extra
network to
Soundeinrichtung
pick
machen.
the
Ist ja
closest
cool.
HRTF in our library. Maybe you'll be sending us a
Muss ich
video
für
of
Kopfhörer
your ears
speziell machen.
and your head, and we'll make a
Muss ich mir
3D
merken.
model of them and synthesize the HRTF. Maybe you'll play an audio game to tune your HRTF. We'll be subtly changing it as you play and home in on the HRTF that gives you the highest score, meaning that it matches you the best. This is a journey we'll all be taking together over the next few years. Ultimately, we're committing to enabling everyone to experience that next level of realism. Hopefully, I've been able to illustrate a bit about our design and decision-making process today and why PlayStation 5 has the feature set that it does. Now comes the fun part. We get to see how the development community takes advantage of that feature set. I'm hoping for the completely unexpected. Will it come from audio, ray tracing, the
Bitte zeig die
capabilities of the
PS5,
SSD,
wie sie
or something
aussieht.
else? I guess
Und
we'll
wehe,
find
sie sieht
out
aus wie ein
soon.
Aschenbecher oder wie ein V.
Thank you for your time.
Nein, nicht so. Die Sache entspannt angehen. Aber es ist wieder noch nicht zu Ende. Ruhe. Post-Credit-Szene. Ach du Scheiße. Ich hab's am Anfang gecallt, die werden nichts zeigen. Nur ein Typ, der redet. Es ist genau passiert. Ich finde es halt langsam ranzig, Digga, von Sony. Dass die so ein Mysterious Move machen. Weil klar, er stand explizit in der Beschreibung, dass er nur über die Technik redet, aber boah. Alter. Nee, Digga, da muss ich auch disliken, weil es muss ein Statement gemacht werden, dass die Scheiße endlich zeigen, das reicht, Digga. Warte, wir können jetzt mal kurz gucken. Xbox Series X Teraflops. Und 12 Teraflops und PS5 hat 10,3. Ja, okay. Ist schon weniger, aber meine Fresse, wen juckt's? Ich kauf mir eh keine Xbox. Ja, also. Was soll ich sagen? Es ist, ja. War klar, dass es irgendwie so endet, aber ich hätte mir schon gerne mehr gewünscht. Naja, egal. Ähm, Das war's im Stream. Hoffen wir, dass bald was Gescheites gezeigt wird. Verpisst euch.